Hi there, my name is Ty McCulloch, and today I'm going to be giving a brief presentation on learner-centered strategies for emergent bilinguals. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The learning objectives for this presentation are as follows. To understand what an emergent bilingual is and why it is important to use this label for these students. To acquire new strategies for emergent bilingual students that are learner-centered. To become informed on how to apply these strategies specifically to a social studies classroom. And lastly, to conclude which strategy or strategies would work best for you and your specific classroom and implement them accordingly. So first off, what is an emergent bilingual and why is it important to use this term instead of an English language learner or English as a second language? Well, an emergent bilingual is a student who is continuing to develop their home language while also learning an additional language such as English. It's important to label these students as emergent bilinguals because it's a positive label, which can give them confidence to continue their education with passion and perseverance. So having defined emergent bilingual, let's jump to our first learner-centered strategy, which is translanguaging. So what is translanguaging? Well, as defined in an article appearing in the Catasol Journal written by Lee and Luo, translanguaging is a fluid communicative language practice where the languages of input and output were purposely juxtaposed. So instead of viewing it as language 1 and language 2, we view the emergent bilingual students as having one unique linguistic repertoire which, used together, can effectively advance the student's educational process. A great example of how to apply translanguaging is with the reading activities. An example provided by Lee and Lowell, the students were given an opportunity to choose a book to read as a class, and they chose The House on Mango Street because it was available both in English and their home language of Spanish. The students were then tasked to lead small group discussions, asking questions about the text, as well as providing their personal inferences. This specific example displays how giving emergent bilingual students both autonomy and an opportunity to utilize all of their linguistic skills can greatly enhance their learning experience. So transitioning from translanguaging, our second learner-centered strategy is sheltered instruction. And as defined by Marcos and Himmel in an article posted by the Center for Applied Linguistics, sheltered instruction came to fruition when ESL and content area teachers began collaborating to strategically and systemically incorporate English language development into content area instruction. So, sheltered instruction consists of consciously teaching the content area with the dual goal of advancing the language development of the emergent bilingual students. This includes providing keywords and content vocabulary in both languages as well as alternative assessments to see if students are grasping the content regardless of their English proficiency. The level of sheltered instruction is dependent on each individual student's English proficiency, with the end goal being the student eventually receiving only mainstream instruction in the content area. So moving on to the third and final learner-centered strategy, this one is simplistic but arguably the most effective, and that is to get to know your students personally and make lessons culturally relevant. Each emergent bilingual student is different, and getting to know them on a personal level will only help you enrich their educational experience. This means finding out their interests, what motivates them, who they look up to, who they aspire to be, and what they wish to learn or get out of your class. Based on your collection of this information, create lessons and class materials that will personally connect with the students, which will make them more likely to engage in class and also enjoy doing so. This is no small feat but can be extremely beneficial for the student's educational advancement. So the last slide I want to look at before concluding this presentation is how to apply these strategies specifically to a social studies classroom, because I myself am a social studies teacher and maybe you are too. So first and foremost, it's essential to deconstruct and unpack the content language used in the social studies class to ensure that these emergent bilingual students can reach the second important aspect of, let us say, a history class, where we then analyze time, place, agency, and both primary and secondary interpretations. It's important to check in with your emergent bilingual students frequently to ensure they're comprehending any new content specific language or vocabulary because it may seem obvious to a monolinguistic English speaker, but it could be confusing to an emergent bilingual. It's always better to be safe than sorry in this circumstance. And lastly, utilize all the previous learner centered strategies covered when you see fit. And for a social studies classroom, especially, really try to make culturally relevant lessons for the emergent bilingual students. More times than not, this will lead to a more enriching lesson for not just the emergent bilingual students, but all the rest of your students in your class as well. So, to conclude with a small reflection section, I want to pose a question to you as a listener. Which strategy stood out the most to you, and which, if any, could you see yourself implementing in your own classroom? Thank you for your input, and thank you for your time.